So, politics here. Chapter 18 is Nationalism and Realpolitik. Well, first we need to start by defining nationalism. I'll define it the way I usually do, which is I mean, there's many different kinds of nationalism, but I want you to consider this one because this is the political version. And that's really what we're talking about. It has to do with the state, with the nation itself, and see if you're a person who loves your country and you want to do what's best for your country, that's called patriotism. If you take that too far and you go to the point where you say it doesn't matter what my country is doing, my country is still the best, and you start to put your country's interest above everything else in the world, everyone else in the world, that can be called nationalism. Now, that form of nationalism is one of the four major forms of I'm tired, sorry guys. One of the four major causes of World War I is going to be eventually nationalism. All right. Now, realpolitik is basically, I always say, well, it's politics based on reality instead of your own personal principles. Well, what it means is if you are let's say you're a politician, you have very strong beliefs. You want to enforce those beliefs. You want to keep those beliefs, hold to those beliefs. But it's just, there's got to be somebody out there that can advance what you want, your beliefs and your ethics and so on, and your political ideologies. But maybe instead of finding a good ally that agrees with you, you may end up getting an ally that is based on practical things, the fact that we can work together even if we don't like each other. See, what happens is when governments are going to come together and they're going to say, look, we need to do this because this is practical. This is good for all of us, really. And the word realpolitik wasn't really actually, I don't think that even became a word until the 20th century. But the time we're talking about is a little bit before that. We're still back in the 19th century. But realpolitik is, there's so many examples, but you're going to see I think it's the next chapter, you're going to see Napoleon III. Okay, he's finally going to come into the picture here. You're going to see Napoleon III working with some people he doesn't like because he wants to gain prestige for France. So it has to be based on some kind of practical reason that we can work together, whether we don't want to ever, have a beer or even say hello to each other again. That's real politics. Here we have a map that shows a place that's going to be of great interest in this chapter. It's going to be because the Crimean War is going to be fought over in that little tiny yellow spot. That's called the Crimean Peninsula. And you can notice, I mean, it's a pretty good overview of Europe. You can see all the way down, Greece, Rome, everywhere, all the way over to Spain, up to, to the British Isles and over into part of Russia and so on, even part of Turkey or, well, I don't know, have we always called it Turkey in here? No, because it was, yeah, I guess we have in this class in 105, but it used to be Asia Minor and so on. But anyway, you have a pretty good overview there. So look at all of that and then notice what's going on here that really is going to make a big deal for a while in the world, well, in the Western world, is going to be this war that's fought on that little peninsula over there. And notice above that little peninsula, you have Moscow and you have Kiev. So we're over in Russia right there. And then again, below that, we have Istanbul, and that's in Turkey. And what's going to happen then is going to be a couple of events, couple of things that caused this war. And let me go ahead and go to the next slide. Third slide is going to show you the Tsar. Tsar Nicholas the First, and I'll tell you a little bit about how the Crimean War became a war. There was something going on that they called the Eastern Question. Now, the Ottoman Empire had been weakening for quite a while, and I'm going to give you a preview of coming attractions. It's not going to be gone until after World War One. Okay, World War One ends in 1918, so anyway, it's going to be around a while, but it is getting weaker by this time. See, what had happened was the area that used to be called Asia Minor, it used to be called, you know, Anatolia, it had many names, but that area south of Russia across the Black Sea is, at this point in time, the Ottoman Empire as of 1453. So it's literally 400 years to the year that the Crimean War is going to be fought. Because the Ottoman Empire, Muslims had come in and they'd taken the city of Constantinople and they had changed it to Istanbul and changed a lot of the Christian icons and made it, you know, a Muslim country, Muslim city. And that had been 400 years ago. So the question was, who's going to get the land, the territory from the Ottoman Empire when they finally just fall apart? So the Tsar over there, Tsar Nicholas I, was thinking, well, you know, I'm pretty close over here. I bet I could probably get my foot in the door. Now, the problem is a lot of other European countries are looking at that same piece of land and they are still, just like him, looking to gain more territory, more prestige, whatever. And so he's not the only one that wants that particular little piece of prime property. So what happens here is Nicholas really wants to find a way to get some power over there in the Ottoman Empire. Now, the thing is, there's some religious things going on, and they might not sound like a big deal to us, but in this time period, it's going to be a pretty big deal, and it's going to be part of the cause of the Crimean War. Okay, so let me go ahead and let me go ahead and stop this, and I'll go ahead and go to the next slide. So what happens is we have two different kinds of Christianity here. We have France, which has been a Roman Catholic country since the time of Clovis in the late 400s, and Clovis died in 511, so somewhere right around there. France has been a Roman Catholic country. That's their official religion up until the time of, well, Napoleon, remember, the French Revolution. And then Napoleon kind of tries to bring it back, but not really. So effectively, the French have now, you know, they're claiming Roman Catholicism again because, as Napoleon said, the majority of people in France are indeed Roman Catholic. Now, Russia and the eastern areas, they're going to have the Eastern Orthodox Church. That's a whole other animal, right? You may remember a little bit about Peter the Great and the Russian Senate and, you know, just all of those things, but you may not. Just know that it's two different versions of Christianity at that time, and they're very much the same. One of the big differences is that the Eastern Orthodox denies the authority of the Pope, but as far as the doctrines and the teachings and so on, to my understanding, the Eastern Orthodox Church and the Roman Catholic Church, and there's a couple more, are what they call in communion with each other. So they can actually go to each other's churches and participate fully and so on. But anyway, that's my religious studies coming out again because I really love religious studies. But the question that arises is, okay, so the Ottomans have control of the Holy Land, you know, Jerusalem and all that area. So the Muslims and, you know, the Ottomans, they've got control of the Holy Land. Well, for a long time, the French had been given the opportunity to be the guardians of the Christian shrines over there in the Holy Land. So Nicholas decides that he wants to challenge France. So Nicholas says, hey, we're we're Eastern Orthodox, we're Christian, we're right here. We're literally right here north of the territory where the Holy Land is. We'd like to be the guardians of the Christian shrines over there in the Holy Land. So Russia asked nicely, and then they pretty much say, well, we're gonna do this. This is something that we really want to do. France, of course, gets angry because obviously, if that's something they've done for a long time, the Russians can't just come in and say, well, we think we'll do it now. So it's righteous anger, I suppose you could say, from the French. It's a good idea for me to stop a minute and give you a little basic background about the leader of France at the time of the Crimean Wars, which, as it says on your PowerPoint, go from 1853 to 1856. You guys may remember the revolutions of 1848. Remember, there was the revolution in 1830, and then we have the revolution of 1848. We have a few different revolutions, Hungary and some others. But in France, you're going to see the French set up the Second French Republic. And you're going to have a guy named Louis Napoleon Bonaparte. Bonaparte, sound familiar? Napoleon, sound familiar? Well, it's that Napoleon's nephew. So Louis Napoleon Bonaparte is elected in 1848 as the president of the new Second French Republic. Okay. Now, what's going to happen is he can't constitutionally continue to serve. So after a couple of years, so in 1851, he basically says, look, I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to make myself emperor. Something like that, right? Pretty much reminds you of somebody else, doesn't it? If you recall. So anyway, Louis Napoleon had been, I think it's Napoleon's nephew, because I think he was the son of Napoleon's brother Louis. And Louis Napoleon really wanted to bring back the prestige of his uncle's Napoleonic empire. Okay, so he is really interested in liberal politics. Now, remember, I mentioned the Carbonari. It was on one of your slides in I think it's the last chapter. And the Carbonari are going to come up again a little bit, secret societies. But Louis Napoleon had been part of the revolutionary liberal Carbonari. So Louis Napoleon, when he becomes president of France, that's great, great for him. 1848, he had been living in exile out of France. He had been in Italy. I think he was in somewhere in Great Britain, I think, until the 1848 revolutions started. Then the new republic was established, and he came back to France, and they turned around and they said, no, this was the new republic that had put themselves in power. Like, no. We don't need a Bonaparte over here right now. We're trying to set up a new government. However, you have this contingency. It's not that huge, but it's very loud, called the Bonapartist. And they believed that Napoleon, the first, that Napoleon was treated badly and he was cheated, and he should have continued to to keep the land that he had captured. And they just felt like Napoleon had gotten a bad deal. So the Bonapartists are going to actually say, hey, you know what? We'd like to have a part, some kind of a say in the government. We appoint this guy, Louis Napoleon. So he ends up basically getting elected to something like our, Senate or House of Representatives, something like that. And he actually, he got elected, and he started to figure out how he could be president. Now, here's how he became president in 1848, was he sort of convinced everyone that he was so much like his uncle that he would be able to bring France back. All of the bad, all of the bad stuff that had happened was going to go away because he was bringing them memories of the time when France was taking over Europe, the time that France was at the top. And he kind of, brought them back to a time where they just were longing for the power of the first Napoleon. So he won a really big victory in the election of 1848. And again, you need to write down, you need to know about Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, okay? You need to know about this guy. So even though he's not on the PowerPoint, that's why I'm spending all this time talking about him. So anyway, they had created a constitution in 1848, and he was, as president, only going to be able to serve until May of 1852, right? So he decides that he's going to change that. So in 1851, he says, we should really change something about that. I mean, 4 years is not enough. Why don't we extend it? He says, I need a second term. And so the National Assembly thinks that, well, if you do that, you're destroying the Constitution, Louis Napoleon. You know what he does? He's a great politician. Louis Napoleon goes off and tours all around France, talking to the people. And even though the people were on his side, the people wanted him to continue to be president for another 4 years. Remember, he had been elected president for 4 years. Okay, that 4 years, it's constitutional. What he does in late 1851 is he takes over France as a dictator. Look at that. He says, the people want me. The people want me to be in this position. Well, okay, the National Assembly said, but you can't do that. It's not constitutional. He didn't care. He got rid of the assembly. He made a new constitution. I mean, it's again, the things that these people do. You look at any government that's around today. This kind of thing, I mean, this is not the ancient world where somebody's just like, yeah, I don't want to stop being president. I want to keep being president another 4 years. Let me have 4 years. Even though Congress, so to speak, the assembly, so even though they say no, he's like, nope, I've got my supporters, and he is confirmed as an emperor. Okay, he is bringing in the Second French Empire. Okay, he ended the Second French Republic. Now remember, Napoleon III is not going to be called Napoleon II, okay, because it's probably something that you would know. If we were in class, I would ask you, and even if you didn't know it, you'd probably be able to figure it out, because this is basically like, remember King Louis the 16th and Marie Antoinette's son? If he had grown up, lived, and everything, he would have become Louis the 17th. So when who became Louis the 18th, when he took that title, Louis the 18th, he left the title Louis the 17th empty. Okay, that's what Louis Napoleon does when he calls himself Napoleon the Third. Okay, now you go back and you look at Napoleon the First. Okay, he had basically, I don't think we talked about this in the French Revolution Napoleon stuff, but because I think that was probably the first PowerPoint I recorded for you guys. But anyway, Napoleon had tried to give up the throne in 1814, And he had said, look, hey, let my son be emperor. If you don't want me to be emperor, just acknowledge that my son is indeed my heir. Well, Napoleon was forced, remember, into exile, and then he came back for 100 days, and then he's, finally beat at Waterloo and everything. But Napoleon II never became the ruler of France. I mean, he had kind of an honorary title for a while. He was called Emperor of the French. We talked about why that's different than Emperor of France, remember. You can review your notes from before. But he became Emperor of the French for a while after his father was exiled again. But when his cousin, Louis Napoleon, becomes emperor, right? He calls himself Napoleon III as a nod to the fact that Napoleon's son should have been emperor. In his eyes, in the eyes of the many Bonapartists that were standing behind he himself, Louis Napoleon. Okay, so back to the slide. Okay, all that stuff I just told you, that's all really important. Just because it's not on a slide, don't blow it off, okay, please. All right, anyway, so Russia wants that land. Russia takes a gamble under Nicholas I. And he's like, all right, well, how about we invade some Turkish territories? And we know that Turkey's not very, or the Ottoman Empire is not very strong, so they'll probably just back off, right? Sorry, I got a drink. Well, Turkey is in, or Ottoman Empire at the time, is invaded by Russia in the territories of Moldavia and Wallachia because Nicholas thought that the Turks would back down, but it doesn't work. The Turks are a little bit stronger than the Russians knew, and the Turks declare war on Russia, October 1853. Now, turns out that Great Britain and France end up jumping right into this war very quickly. And the question is, why does Great Britain and France, why do they jump in there within just a few months and declare war on Russia also? Well, there's some reasons here. Okay, Great Britain and France are each going to have their own, well, it's their own national interest at heart, right? Remember, nationalism. So while Russia is trying to exert their power and increase their territory and everything, so is France. Remember, you've got Napoleon III on the throne over in France, wanting to be his uncle. Now, Great Britain, for their part, Great Britain, and you'll see here in a couple of minutes, you're going to see a couple of maps, and you already saw the one at the beginning where the Black Sea was visible in between Russia to the north and the Ottoman Empire to the south. But you're also going to see a map in a minute that shows how Russia, if they got Turkey, Russia would be able to use the Black Sea as kind of their own personal lake, so to speak, and they would be able to launch very easily into the Mediterranean. Great Britain had the Great Navy. Great Britain does not want to be challenged in the Mediterranean. So look at this map, and this is basically just showing you the territories where Russia invaded, Moldavia and Wallachia. And I always like to point out Transylvania. It's a real place, you know. I always say in my jokingly joking voice, yeah, I'm like, oh, well, you know, Transylvania, that's the place where you had Dracula and Frankenstein and all those guys or whatever. But again, it's a real place, and this is where we have the Russians coming into Turkish territory and the Turks having none of it. Slide 7 shows you a close-up here of Russia and the Black Sea, and there's Moldavia and Wallachia over there, and all the other places, Bulgaria and so on. Look down at the bottom, and you'll see the Ottoman Empire, how their territory stretches across there in the green. And notice, though, the Black Sea. If Russia takes the Black Sea and they take Turkey, then really, yeah, they're going to be able to launch right over into the Mediterranean, straight through the Aegean Sea, and they're going to move west, and there they are. So again, England, Great Britain doesn't want to be challenged by their navy. So that's a big part of it too. So we end up with the Ottoman Empire, Great Britain, and France fighting against Russia. Okay. Russia. Come on, Russia. You knew better than this. Well, apparently not. I mean, the war was poorly planned, poorly carried out. Nicholas went in there and he thought they were weak, and they weren't quite as weak as he thought they were. So this thing's going to go on and on. Now, again, it's mostly fought on and around that tiny little yellow Crimean peninsula. And Sevastopol was going to be the Russian stronghold, and it's going to finally fall in September of 1855. 6 months after the fall of Sevastopol, you're going to have Nicholas I dying. And then, after his death, the new Tsar, Alexander II, comes in and asks for peace. Okay? That's something that, I mean, really, nobody's gaining from this war. Everybody's just, making a big old mess with this war. However, you'll see in just a minute that somebody does gain. So they signed the Treaty of Paris. There's many treaties of Paris. As far as wars go, many treaties of Paris. So they signed the Treaty of Paris here. And one thing they do in that treaty is they declare the Black Sea is neutral. Okay, Russia, you guys, none of you guys can use the Black Sea to come over here and head toward the English Channel. You just can't do that. But there's a lot of other things they decide as well. Oh yeah, there's other things they do as well besides declare the Black Sea neutral. Okay, first of all, like I said, I think it strained and bent and pulled and pushed the concert of Europe almost to the brink. Well, probably to the brink, but not to the breaking point. Okay, and that's, I think, even in your textbook, I think whoever wrote that chapter says that, and some other historians agree with that. I really don't. I think the concert of Europe was strong in the beginning. I think the Crimean War messed it up. But see, and other historians that agree, that I agree with and that agree with me, we look at the fact that there was not a war of the magnitude of the Napoleonic Wars or World War I for 99 years. So something was right. Even though we've got a lot of powerful people in this war, a lot of powerful countries, the Crimean War is just not this huge continental war. It's just not. So what happens here is Austria and Russia became enemies. Why? Well, here's what happened. Back in 1848, if you recall, we've talked about there were revolutions, and I told you that's how Louis Napoleon Bonaparte became president of the Second Republic of France and everything else that happened with him. Well, Austria had a revolution in 1848 as well. There was an ethnic group called the Magyars that were really trying to take over Russia, or not Russia, I am so sorry. I hope I said Austria in the first place. Okay. Austria had a revolution in 1848 also. And Austria was being taken over by, there was a certain group, the Magyars, that were taking them over and trying to destroy the government of Austria. And you know who came to their aid? Russia in 1848. Okay. 1848 is not that long ago when we're talking about the Crimean War. So Russia did not have the backing of Austria in this war. Okay, Russia had to go it alone. So Russia's humiliated. I mean, man, not my ally didn't even come and help. Great Britain's disillusioned because this was such a horrible war. It was, again, It was poorly planned, and it just nobody really accomplished anything, right? Austria, I mean, after they've kind of betrayed their alliance with Russia, Austria is looking over there like the bad guy, like, hey, you didn't come help Russia? Nobody wants to be your ally. So, this new situation is going to help lead to two very important things. The most important one is the unification of Germany, but the first one that happens is the unification of Italy. Now, out of the Crimean War, out of Russia and Great Britain and France and the Ottoman Empire, the big players in that war, only one really gains prestige, and that is Napoleon III's France. Okay, because they're on the winning side of the war. Okay, so he was happy about that. On slide 10, we're getting into some big stuff in the next few slides, starting here. This is the precursor to what will be the Italian unification movement. Okay, I've labeled it the early Italian unification movement. So in the early 1800s, we had different groups that were trying to unify the Italian peninsula. And I've got a map I'll show you on here on this particular video at some point a little bit later. But you have many different countries and territories on the Italian peninsula. There had been a lot of different groups that wanted to unify over the years. Now, among them were the Republicans, the ones who wanted to make it a republic. Okay, and we have up at the top, you have the Romantic Republican nationalist Giuseppe Mazzini. Okay, Mazzini's on the bottom left, and he had worked with the Carbonari toward the goal of Italian unification in the 1800s, the early 1800s. And we have over on the right bottom, we have the leader of the Carbonari, Giuseppe Garibaldi. Now remember Garibaldi, he's going to be a big player in the Italian unification movement. Okay, and he is also a Republican because he's a Republican nationalist. Maybe, I don't know, maybe both of them are romantic Republican nationalists if we really think about it. But when you romanticize something, that means you idealize it. You imagine it as being more perfect, or if you think back on memories, you romanticize them sometimes and you forget some of the bad. Well, the romantic Republican nationalists, that whole idea is that they're striving for something really maybe a little bit out of reach in reality. Not the republic part, because of course a republic is something that's doable. Okay, it's going to take a lot of work, but they can do that. But the nationalism is driving them to want to unify the entire Italian peninsula. Okay, so this is going to cause a problem with the other people who want to unify Italy, because see, instead of just the Republicans, the ones who want a republic, you also have another group in the early 1800s who were monarchists. They wanted a unified Italy to be a monarchy with a king. Okay, so the problem was, I can tell you, write these down. Okay, I can tell you that the problem was in the early Italian unification movement, partially because they couldn't quite agree on what type of government they wanted. Do we want to be a republic, or do we want to be a monarchy if we all work together? Well, they couldn't quite do that. Okay, and they couldn't agree on several other things as far as just as far as simple things like leadership in some other areas, even smaller things. So it never happened. Now, the other big thing that made the early Italian unification movement fail in the early 1800s was the lack of a grassroots movement. Okay, you had the leaders like Mazzini and Garibaldi out there, rah, rah, let's go. But you didn't have the people out there asking, rah, rah, let's go, come on, friends, let's all go do this. So this was a top-down movement from these type of guys, not a grassroots movement. So those were weaknesses. Basically, I talked about the why at the top of this particular slide. At the end of that last one, the early 19th century movements failed because, like I said, it's republic or a monarchy, some leadership issues, and no grassroots, support from the people. It was more the leaders of these groups that wanted the unification. But Italy is going to finally be unified with the help of a liberal aristocratic nationalist. Now, he's also a nationalist, but he is also a monarchist. Okay, he wants a monarchy. Now, this is Camille Cavour, who's the prime minister of the Kingdom of Piedmont, Sardinia. So here's where we see an example of realpolitik, because this guy, we're really not sure if he wanted to unite all of the Italian peninsula or not, but that's certainly what he does. Whether there's some thought that he only wanted to unite the northern part of Italy, but by golly, the whole Italian peninsula is unified before he's done. So he's going to use war, and he's going to use secret diplomacy, working with Napoleon III. Okay, so that's where we have a case again, like I said, of realpolitik. You're working with someone who can. It's a practical move. Strange bedfellows. You might not like each other. You might not have anything in common, or very little in common. But hey, what can you give me if I work with you? Yeah, sure, I'll be your ally. So watch for that. Cavour, the prime minister of the Kingdom of Piedmont, Sardinia, I'm probably just going to call it Piedmont for now because it's a little bit easier it slides off the tongue a little bit more easily. But Camille Cavour is going to be doing some things that are very similar to what Napoleon III had been doing over in France. See, we're living at a time when the Industrial Revolution here in the 1850s is rolling. And so Cavour wants to expand their economy, and he knows that the Industrial Revolution, the industry, is the way to go. So he's over there building roads and railroads and canals because remember, you have to produce the goods, and then you have to deliver the goods to wherever they're going to go to be sold. So he's over there taking care of the transportation to get the goods from point A to point B. And then he's also expanding the credit system where more people could borrow money to start businesses. Now, he ends up making more money with his policies, and he spends a lot of his money on the military. He wants to challenge Austria. Now, why does he want to challenge Austria? Well, it turns out that Austria has taken over a part of the Italian peninsula. So why is Cavour so concerned about Austria? What are they doing? Why does he want to challenge Austria? Well, back in the days of Napoleon, as everything, actually it was 1815 when the Congress of Vienna met, but at the end of the Congress of Vienna, as they were, figuring out what to do to keep the peace with Napoleon, Lombardy is going to be restored to Austria along with Venetia. Okay, they're going to have this kingdom of Lombardy, Venetia, that was given to Austria. So this is on the northern part of the Italian peninsula. And the idea, and you're going to see this happen with Austria more than once, But the idea is Austria is in our territory. We are Italians. We're trying to unify our land, in a very nationalistic way. This is our land. We need to get rid of Austria. So Camillo Cavour, Prime Minister of Piedmont, has been building up his military. So can he challenge Austria? Well, he's pretty sure he can't. Not exactly. He needs an ally. So he works with Napoleon III. So Cavour, at some point in 1858 or so, had made some kind of an agreement with Napoleon III. Okay, so they were going to work together, and we don't know exactly what they agreed upon, but we're really certain that this is what opened up what became the French and the Piedmont alliance. Okay, because the French and the Piedmonts are going to work, the Piedmontese army, they're going to work together to get rid of the Austrians from the Italian peninsula. So this is going to be a really important thing as Italy is trying to unify, and this is going to give Camille Cavour a surprise, because can you really trust Napoleon III? I wouldn't trust him. Okay, he's got an ulterior motive, let's just put it that way. And his ulterior motive is, again, to build up his land, to build up the prestige of France and all of that. So basically, the story goes that Napoleon III said, of course, we will help you get rid of Austria out of that land in the north. We'll help you with that if you can make it look like we are coming in to rescue you. We'll help you fight Austria, but we don't want to look like we're attacking Austria. How are we going to do that? How's that going to happen? Well, Napoleon III probably said, I don't know. You're going to have to figure out a way to make France look like the hero, and we'll be right there beside you. Remember, this is going to be an agreement that we believe was made between Cavour and Napoleon III. And sometimes, historians, as I always say, disagree. We're not sure exactly if it happened through just some kind of a handshake deal or whatever. But we do know that something happened where we have the French and the Piedmontese military allying together. So the idea was that France and Piedmont had decided that they needed to work together to get rid of the power that Austria was exerting all over. But also at this time, again, they were going to start by the Italian peninsula, by removing them from there. So anyway, what they thought they might do is, you're going to see the discussion that we believe happened is, at least what they were going to do, they planned to do, was that they were going to divide up the territory in the north that had been controlled by Austria since, remember, Napoleon, 1815, Congress of Vienna, all that stuff I just talked about. So they were going to have that part of it was going to go to Piedmont, part of it was going to go to France. Okay, now that was the idea, that was supposedly the plan that had come about between Cavour and Napoleon III. As I said, I wouldn't trust Napoleon III. Maybe it's because I know what happens. I don't know. But Napoleon III really wanted prestige for France, right? He wanted to bring France back to that, place of his uncle and all this kind of stuff. So Napoleon III is going to want land. That was part of what we think, why we think they made that type of deal. But also, Napoleon III wants more, I guess, what's the best word? I already said prestige, but I guess what he's looking for is a war that he knows he can come out in this, on the side of the victors. He wants Napoleon III is looking for a war with Austria that he can win. Okay, so this is a pretty good deal in that case because Napoleon III was supposedly going to get some land and he was going to get that victory because he knew if they united, they would be able to defeat pretty handily Austria. So that was at least the idea. Remember, Napoleon III wants France to appear the hero, not the aggressor. So there has to be a way to provoke Austria into attacking. So there is a way to provoke Austria. And you're going to see this happening in March of 1859. And Sardinia is going to mobilize their army, the Piedmont Sardinia. They're going to mobilize their army. So about a month later, in April, it was close to a month later, Austria mobilizes their army. Now, again, they're sharing a border. Okay, the Piedmont Sardinian territory shares a border with the Austrian-controlled territory. So Austria delivers an ultimatum over to Piedmont and says, you need to demobilize. So Sardinia said no. Now remember, in military, I don't know, in the military, if you look at things like the art of war or whatever, you're going to notice that once you mobilize, once you have your troops prepared to fight, a lot of times the other person, the other nation, the other whoever you're fighting against is going to take that mobilization as an act of war. So when Piedmont mobilized their army in March of 1859, Austria looked at that and said, wow, okay, about a month later, they mobilized. And then they're going to say, Piedmont, you need to stand down. Well, Piedmont said no. So the war is going to begin sometime in April of 1859 when Austria invades the kingdom of Piedmont Sardinia. And then in early May, here comes Napoleon III declaring war on Austria. So everything's going pretty much as planned, really, at that point. But we have a couple of losses at the beginning of this war, and these are actually really good for Napoleon III. Okay, you have those losses, the big ones here are at Magenta and Solferino. And by this point in time, Napoleon III has decided, you know what, I've got a victory right now. Two great battles. I think I'm going to pull out of this war. Wait, what? He was supposed to be allied with Piedmont Sardinia, with Camille Cavour. He was supposed to be helping get rid of Austria from Italian territory. So why does he go ahead at this point and basically betray Piedmont Sardinia? Well, there's a few reasons, okay, that he signs a peace treaty with Austria in July of 1859. Now, this is called a separate peace because both of the allies are not signing the same treaty with Austria. He's signing a separate peace. But why? So the reason number one that Napoleon III is going to want to seek out peace with Austria is because Prussia was mobilizing. And if Prussia mobilized, they were going to support Austria. Now, you'll find out later that Prussia and Austria are going to have their differences, but they're both Germanic or German states. So he knew that Prussia was mobilizing, which would make things harder to continue with those wins over Austria if they have the might of Prussia behind them. So that's number one. Number two, Napoleon III is very practical, and he realizes that this war may take longer than he thought. He didn't want to spend that much time. He just wanted a victory. So in that case, that was a smart move for that reason. He didn't want the war to take so much of his time, but he still had some victories. Also, third, Napoleon knows winter's coming. He doesn't really want to be involved in a winter war. So what he does is he goes and he makes that separate peace. And if you're, I don't know if you're interested in looking it up, I'll tell you it won't be on a test or a quiz or anything, but it's going to be sometimes called the Armistice of Villafranca. It's Villafranca. And again, this is where Napoleon III is getting a separate peace with Austria without even, talking to Cavour. So you're going to see an interesting thing happen here. Okay. In the meeting that Napoleon III has with the Emperor of Austria, who is Francis Joseph, Napoleon's going to get Lombardy. And Napoleon III then gives Lombardy to Piedmont, Sardinia. So that was kind of an interesting turn of events. But the important thing to notice here is that Italy only gets Lombardy, not Venetia at this point. So Italy is going to continue trying to unify, but it's going to be quite a while before they get Venetia or Venice. So after the whole thing, with Villafranca, Cavour decided that he was, done. He was going to quit. So he did. He actually left his position as prime minister of Piedmont, Sardinia, and you're going to see that eventually he's going to come back and so on. But he was so angered. Now, Napoleon III always knew somewhere in the back of his mind also that if Italy actually did unite, it might present a big threat to French sovereignty. So remember, that's what's really the most important thing to Napoleon III anyway. So what's going on here is just a bunch of complex pieces of a bigger puzzle that make up Realpolitik, where we've got these guys working together, each with their own ideas and each with their own goals in mind, sort of using each other. So sometimes that works better. Sometimes it turns out to be this big mess such as this. So anyway, Cavour had retired and he was concerned about some new things that started going on a while after that. He was out of the position. Like I said, it was about 6 or 8 months. It wasn't a very long retirement or the resignation was not permanent. Let's put it that way. So the king of Piedmont, Sardinia was Victor Emmanuel. And Victor Emmanuel wondered if he might need Cavour to come back after one of his cabinet leaders resigned. So Cavour was actually asked to come back by the king of Piedmont, Sardinia in early 1860. So there's a lot of other things that go on. But then we have another character who comes in that we mentioned before, and that is Giuseppe Garibaldi. So what follows here, what I'm going to tell you, there's a little bit of question about some of this. There's some other sources that say slightly different things, but the way that this probably happened, of course, we know Garibaldi had been out of the country for a while, but when he returned to Italy as a nationalist, remember, a romantic Republican nationalist, he was angry because Cavour had actually allowed the regions of Savoy and Nice to go to France, to go to Napoleon III. So Garibaldi was furious because Nice was his birthplace and it had been given to France. So he wanted to go and take Nice back from France. And anyway, he's going to end up going south. So what we have here is some sources say that he was asked to go south in a basically a way to get him away from northern Italy, to get him further from Piedmont, Sardinia. But the king, okay, the king actually kind of King Victor Emmanuel, we think he kind of wanted this complete unification, and he kind of wanted Garibaldi to go back and try to get Nice. But anyway, meanwhile, there's some hope of a revolution down in Naples, but that was never a grassroots movement. Remember, that was part of the problem in the early 1800s, was that there was no grassroots movement aside from the fact that they couldn't decide if they wanted to be a republic or a monarchy. Anyway, for some reason, you're going to have Garibaldi going down to Naples. And at that time, he is going to take Naples, and you're going to see that when he gets down there, it's not going to take him very long before he's going to make his way north. Okay. So he goes down there with 1,000 men, and he captures Sicily, first of all. He takes Sicily, and then he takes Naples. And as I said, he's working his way north. So his 1,000 men are called the Red Shirts. And by the time we notice that Garibaldi is headed north, he is right getting close to Rome. So that seems to be a little bit dangerous in the eyes of some of the leaders of Italy and even some of the leadership in France, because France is made up of a lot of Catholics. Meanwhile, Cavour and Garibaldi had been having the argument about, are we going to be a monarchy or are we going to be a republic? Remember, Garibaldi wants a republic. Cavour is literally in a monarchy, so he wants to be, to continue a monarchy if we're going to unify Italy. So what had happened, though, with Garibaldi taking Sicily and then all the way up through Naples, is he had sort of become he'd sort of become a dictator in the south of Italy, or the Italian peninsula and the island of Sicily. So you're going to have those guys really not wanting to change their minds. Cavour tried to somehow take Sicily, first of all, the gains that Garibaldi had made, and annex them to Piedmont, which would have been partial unification of Italy. I mean, it would have been a start, because you're finding out in a map that I'm going to show you, you're finding out, that Piedmont is way up north, Sicily's down in the south, and Naples is in the south. So that was something that Garibaldi is not going to allow. See, Garibaldi wants the republic, so now that he's pretty much dictator down there in the south, he's going to say, you know what? I think that we should remove Cavour. So he's going to attack the Papal States. Now, at that time, when we're talking about 1859, 1860, this era, you're going to have the Papal States being a series of territories that were actually ruled by the Pope. That's going to go from about the 700s up until 1870, and we're going to see a war that's fought there in 1870 and 71 that's called the Franco-Prussian War a little bit later. But anyway, the Papal States were in danger. Cavour thinks, oh, well, France is going to declare a war to come and help the Papal States because, as I said, France is an officially Catholic nation. Many Catholics there, or at least even if they were no longer the state religion, remember, as I said before, they're still the majority. So Garibaldi had been weakened a little bit, and Cavour sends down the Piedmontese army, and they take over some of the papal states. So what we've got now is a big old mess. We've got the territories that Piedmont had conquered just then united with the territories that Garibaldi had in the south. So what we see here was whether or not Cavour wanted to unite all of Italy, which some historians disagree about too. Garibaldi, there was never a question. He really did want all of Italy to be united. But they're going to get together and they're going to have to figure out what to do. Because are we going to have a monarchy or are we going to have a republic? So if you notice on the slide, I have that Garibaldi's nationalism won over his republicanism. Okay, in other words, he was more interested and more passionate about uniting Italy in one nation than he was about having Italy become a republic. So he ended up ceding that to Cavour. So what do? They end up going with, again, the monarchy. And we have the first king of Italy declared in March of 1861. This is Victor Emmanuel II. This is a unified Italy. But look at this. Look at that second bullet point. Subjugation versus liberation. Okay, the question is going to arise whether many of the Italian states were actually liberated by Piedmont and Garibaldi and all of this. Were they actually liberated with unification, or were they subjugated under the control of Piedmont? Okay, and here's why. Because in 1848, the Piedmont Constitution becomes, I'm sorry, that's the wrong way to say that. The 1848, that was back when they were having the revolutions in Italy and all around, when they had written that constitution of Piedmont, Sardinia. But the 1848 Constitution in 1861 becomes the charter or the constitution for this brand new kingdom of Italy. Now, not only that, but notice who has become king. It's the king of Piedmont, Sardinia. So think of it this way. This is what I always say in class. I'm like, okay, let's just say for some reason Kentucky and Indiana decided that they were going to join forces and become one big state. Okay. What if they decided, somehow that they were going to take the Constitution of Indiana, because all states have their own constitution, and they were going to make that the Constitution of the newly created Kentuckiana. For the record, I don't like that saying. I just learned it when I moved to northern Kentucky. Ew. But anyway, let's just say that they're going to call this new state Kentuckiana. And it's going to encompass all of what used to be Indiana and all of what used to be Kentucky. So what if they take that Constitution, use it for this new state, and they take the governor and make him the governor of this new state? Governor of Indiana is going to be now the governor of Kentuckiana, and all the laws from Indiana, etc., etc. So you see, what would we feel like in Kentucky? Would we feel like, wow, this is great. We've been freed. We've got this really big new state. Or would we feel like, wait a minute, what just happened? Didn't Indiana just literally take over Kentucky? So you see the comparison there, because a lot of people in Italy in this new kingdom felt like they had been taken over by the Kingdom of Piedmont Sardinia. And I believe with good reason they feel that way. So here's a map that shows Italy somewhere around this time, and you can see some dates over there, whatever. But notice you have Savoy up there in the north west that had been ceded to France in 1860. You have Nice that had been ceded to France in 1860, and the stuff that we just talked about, right? We have up in the north Piedmont, and then you notice the words Kingdom of Sardinia. So it goes across, from Piedmont and also down there to that island. That's the Kingdom of Piedmont Sardinia. Okay, sometimes people call it the Kingdom of Piedmont, sometimes they call it Sardinia, etc. Okay, so you can see where it is now. Now there's Lombardy and Venetia up on the top, the northeastern part of the Italian peninsula at that time. And you notice there's all these different states. You notice down at the bottom, there's the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies. We have the island of Sicily right off the boot of the Italian peninsula. And then you have the Papal States, you have Tuscany, and so on. So you can look at that and get an idea of what's going on, because Garibaldi, you can see how far Garibaldi was when he went down to Sicily and conquered Sicily and Naples and so on, was headed toward the Papal States. You can see how far away he was from Cavour. And you're going to see how they also, when you send the Piedmontese army down and take part of the Papal States, you can see how that, the Piedmontese and the Garibaldi people are going to meet, and that's going to formulate what will become eventually this new Kingdom of Italy. Now, all of it's not been united at that time. It's going to be a little bit later. Let's go to the next slide so you can see what I mean by that. Okay, so on slide 17, we have the final stage of Italian unification. Now remember, the unification is not completed at that point. It's not going to be for quite a while completed, because if you recall, Venetia was one of the two areas that Piedmont really wanted in the northern part of the Italian peninsula. That was one reason they had Napoleon III working with them, to get Austria out of that territory. However, because Napoleon III went off and made a separate peace with Austria, only Lombardy is given to the Italians, and that was through Napoleon III. Remember that. Okay, that's the whole thing. So we don't have Venetia yet. You're not going to have Venetia united and unified with Italy until 1866, and we'll see that later in the Austro-Prussian War, which is going to be one of, that's a different war. That's a war of German unification. And then you also know that there were some issues around Rome, okay, around the papal areas, the papal states, the papal region. There were some issues there. So you had some troops that the French had put in the territory of Rome quite a while before, as Napoleon III and Cavour were working together. One of the things was Napoleon III was asking maybe for some more land. So anyway, the French were right there in Rome until 1870, okay? And that's going to be during the Franco-Prussian War. That's going to be the third war of German unification. Now, Italy's going to annex Rome and make it the capital, and then eventually the papacy is confining itself more and more and more to smaller spaces. And eventually, I don't remember if it's 1924. I don't know why that's in my mind for some reason. But eventually, you're just going to end up with Vatican City becoming and being and remaining to this day a sovereign nation inside of a city, inside of a bigger nation, which I think is actually really interesting. So that's the final part of Italian unification. Now we're going to roll on to German unification. prepare yourselves because this is the most important political event in the Western world in the entire time period from 1850 to 1914. And it all revolves around this guy, Otto von Bismarck. You may remember when we talked about, oh gosh, what was that? Congress of Vienna, I guess, when I mentioned it was like von Metternich or somebody. I'm like, the von means that you have noble birth. Okay, there's nobility in your family. So Otto von Bismarck. So I've just got a little picture someone had drawn on there that I thought was cute online at one point. So if we look back, I've probably mentioned this before in class, probably just in passing, but you're gonna see that there's no Germany really until 1871. There's all these different independent German states, 39 by the early 1800s. Now remember too that from about the year 800 with the coronation of Charlemagne to about 18-ish 1800-ish with Napoleon kind of ending it, it was called the Holy Roman Empire. Now, again, the borders are going to change over literally 1,000 years of the Holy Roman Empire, and it's always, it's going to be different. It's always in flux, very fluid. But by the early 1800s, we have these German states that are loosely allied with each other. So usually, when I'm talking about pre 1870, 1871, I usually talk about the German states, or if it's back even further, I'll specifically refer to the Holy Roman Empire. So by the early 1800s, we've got all these different states, and the two most powerful are going to be Austria and Prussia. Prussia's the big one because it covers over half of the German territory, and that's gonna cause a rivalry between Austria and Prussia as they're fighting for control of what's going to become a unified German country or a German nation. Now the Zollverein is going to be a customs union that was created by Prussia in 1834. So we see this particular thing as having a lot of benefits because if you're going to trade within the Zollverein, you're going to have to pay fewer taxes or tariffs to each other. So this was, free trade agreement with Prussia or between Prussia and its, neighboring German states. Now it's going to be up in the north. So what that is, again, this is a step toward the unification of Germany when we have the Zollverein with Prussia at its head. And having control of the Zollverein also makes Prussia retain even more power for themselves. Slide number 20, I've put a map of Germany or the German states that is accurate as of the Congress of Vienna and up and through at least 1830. But the reason I put a map up here at all, first of all, you need to kind of know where things are located in general. But I want you to notice the enormity of Prussia up there. Okay, the dark blue, the Prussian territories. And then down there to the south, you have Austria. And at that time, notice there's a boundary between Austria and Hungary, and that's eventually going to change because it's encompassing on this map Austria, Hungary, and Bohemia, but it's going to change. We're going to have later on the merging of Austria, Hungary into this really strange hybrid of an empire slash kingdom. And you also look around, you can see places like Bavaria and Hanover and other places that you might recognize as you go through here and learn about where everything is located as far as these states and actually the bigger picture of Europe. So again, remember, the most important political thing that happened in this whole time period from about 1850 up until outbreak of World War I, really, is going to be the unification of Germany. So, how do we get there? Well, first of all, you have William, or in German, Wilhelm, the first King of Prussia in 1861. Now, it turned out that his brother, his older brother, I think it was Frederick William, was his older brother. In 1858, he had been declared, quote, insane, end quote. So William had taken over as, he was acting as a regent. He had taken over, and he was actually doing the job of the king from 1858 to 1861 already. And we've heard of those type of stories a few times in this class over the course of the semester. So William the First really has in his mind that he wants military reform, military reform. And part of that is he wants to double the size of the army. He wants Prussia to be a player, a big player. Now, does he have unification of Germany in mind, of the German states? Probably. Okay. He also wants to institute 3 years of compulsory service by the young men in the Prussian military. Okay, so what's going to happen is William the First is going to overrule Parliament because they, in many ways, they just didn't think it was necessary. I mean, there's some things that I've read that said they didn't want their sons to have to go serve in the military for mandatory period of time. Either way, the King of Prussia, William the First, wants to expand the army and make it bigger and more efficient and better, just all the stuff. So he overruled Parliament, and what that showed then is that as a king, he had a little bit more power when he took the power than were these men who were elected by the people. So we're not really even pretending like Prussia is based on democracy at this point at all, because it's not. But William the First was going to be able to do what he wanted here because he had made a very wise choice by appointing one of the most powerful men in that era, the one that I showed you earlier, Otto von Bismarck. He brought in Bismarck as the chancellor or the prime minister in 1862. And Bismarck didn't really care what Parliament thought about building up the military. So Bismarck said, you know what? Let's just do it anyway. So William had backing. Those two were on the same page in many ways. So Bismarck is going to prove to be the architect of so many things, most importantly, German unification. Sometimes Bismarck is referred to as the Iron Chancellor. And I'll tell you a few things about Bismarck that you need to be aware of. First of all, he was from the upper class. And that goes to that third bullet on the left-hand side, the Junker. Okay, it's a particular term for some of the landed gentry, the upper class in Germany today, or in the German states back then. So they were members of the nobility. They owned so much land, and it's kind of like serfdom. I mean, it's based on the idea of serfdom from the medieval times, where you're going to have these estates with vast amounts of land that they're going to have peasants working on them. Again, serfdom, pretty much. So he's a Junker. This is something that you're born into, the nobility. He's also then, again, like I said, number one there, the first one is aristocrat, and Junker's a specific type. He's also conservative. Remember, people like Cavour and some of them are are liberal. He's a conservative in the way he rules and the way he thinks, as you'll see as we go along. He's also a lawyer, a politician, and an opportunist. All those last three there, sometimes you have a lot of lawyers who are politicians, absolutely. And you have a lot of politicians who are opportunists. You know, they're gonna strike when something is out there that they think they can make some gains from acting upon. Now, Bismarck's a brilliant guy. He went to war only if he knew he would win. He did not believe in male suffrage being for every man, universal male suffrage, because to him that was ridiculous. Why should the peasants and so on, why should they have the right to vote? Remember, he's an aristocrat and he's also a conservative. He doesn't like those liberal ideas. And he also isn't really as concerned about, say, the peasants and the middle class, as we would say today, that would come in between there. He's not really concerned about them. He's got his own beliefs. What he believes in is constitutionalism, but leaving the monarch to almost complete power. So you have a constitution, but you don't have a parliament, you don't have a legal system, and you don't have a judicial system that will really have challenges that are effective against that monarch. That's what Bismarck wants, strong monarchy. Like I said about Napoleon III and some others, Cavour for that matter, due to the time they're living, most of these people who are going to be powerful and successful in government are going to be supporters of industry. It's the Industrial Revolution, right? Now, Bismarck is very much anti Austrian. Now, remember, I have why on there, but you know why. Because Austria is the other power that might present a problem if Prussia decided they wanted to unite the German states under Prussian control. Austria was the second of the two most dominant states. Okay, so that's a rivalry. So 1862 to 1866, he ignores Parliament. He builds up the army, gives them more training, gives them more weaponry, gives, more men brought into the Prussian army. Everything that Parliament had kind of rejected, Bismarck and William I, again, in total agreement, it's happening. He's doing everything that they did not want in Parliament. He's building up that military. Now, a lot of times when you're building up your military, it's because you have a threat. Sometimes, though, it's because you may want to be a threat to someone else. You may be preparing to conquer another territory or so. So, under Bismarck, we're going to have three wars of German unification. The first one's the Danish War, and it sets it off, basically. You have 1864, the territories up there on the Danish peninsula of Schleswig-Holstein, which I can't pronounce correctly, even though I can read German. I'm not even going to pretend like I can have an accent. But anyway, Austria and Prussia are going to come together because Denmark is trying to take these lands, okay, these German-speaking lands, and Austria and Prussia come together and they're able to beat Denmark, and then they're going to decide that they manage those two territories together. See, this is an example too of realpolitik. I mean, Prussia and Austria, they don't like each other. They come together to defeat Denmark. So it was a very practical thing to do. Now, the fact that they decided that they were going to actually share responsibility in some ways for these territories, that's going to prove to not work out very well. But then again, Bismarck knew that that's exactly what would happen probably. So after the Danish War, the second war is going to be the Austro-Prussian War. So this is again over the same territories, Schleswig and Holstein, June of 1866. Now, Russia and France have been convinced by Bismarck to be neutral. Remember, who is still in France as the emperor at that moment? This would be Napoleon III. So anyway, there was some talk that Bismarck maybe promised Napoleon III some land, and then Napoleon called him on it later. Bismarck laughed in his face. I don't know. That was a story. But anyway, Russia and France were convinced to stay out of it. Okay, so Prussia allied with Italy. Now, again, what's going on here? Remember, Italy did not have all of their territory they wanted. Remember, they had not received Venetia from Austria. So that's going to be part of it. Prussia knows that Italy wants to get Austria out of their territory, and Prussia wants a war with Austria. Well, because first of all, they were Bismarck, I say they, Bismarck was really smart because in the Danish War, one reason that they actually were allied together fighting against the Danish was so Bismarck could see how his buildup of the Prussian military was going, and he could observe what the Austrians actually had that they would be fighting against if he decided, when he decided, to take on Austria. So, anyway, we've got a dispute over those two territories again in June of 1866. So, of course, as anybody could have seen coming, the outbreak of war is going to come because of that Schleswig and Holstein, the fact that they had been working on this together, jointly and so on. So it starts in what is it, January of 1866, and Prussia is going to say to the Austrians something about one of the parts of one of those territories, and then he's going to come back and say, hey, you've taken over too much of this territory, and so you've kind of broken our agreement. So Austria is going to reply sometime in February saying, no, we really didn't. We didn't break the agreement. So Austria mobilizes its troops right on the border of Prussia. You remember that happened before with Napoleon and Lombardy. And yeah, you remember that. It's not been that long since the Italian unification, right? Sorry about that. But, okay. I forgot to turn the sound off again. Anyway, what's going to happen again is you're going to have Prussia and Italy coming together, and you're going to see that this war is going to not be all that, I don't know, difficult for Bismarck's army. Okay? What we know, at least what most historians believe, is that Bismarck was looking way ahead, and Bismarck had seen that, of course, the Zollverein was eventually going to become something called the North German Confederation. So we think that he was looking ahead. I mean, I really believe he was looking ahead because that's exactly the type of guy he is. He's planning. Remember, he doesn't want to go to war unless he knows he can win. So anyway, the war is going to be pretty, I don't know, it's pretty quick. It's not a long-lasting war that goes on and on and on. It's going to be over roughly by July of 1866. And really it starts really just a few weeks before that, actually getting into the war. So Bismarck has gotten a great victory in the Second War, what we call the Second War of German Unification. The Austro-Prussian War is significant for a few things. I mean, you're going to have the railroads, of course. You have the breech loading rifles, though, the rifles that you can load down by where you fire, as opposed to what the Austrians had, which were the muzzle loading rifles, where you load way down at the end of the barrel or the muzzle. It's a lot faster to use the breech loading rifles. So Austria is defeated, as I said, in a war that we sometimes call the Seven Weeks' War. And Venetia finally goes to Italy here in 1866. Now, the biggest result here of the Austro-Prussian War is that Austria is going to be excluded from German affairs, pretty much. Austria is going to want to get back at them in some way. But I mean, at the moment, as soon as this war is over, you're going to see Bismarck really asking for peace with the Austrians, but at the same time, really kind of excluding them from everything. Now, Bismarck did not try to take Austrian land, and he's also brilliant when he did that, because if he left Austria alone and just said, okay, we've got peace now, okay, then that would leave them open in case Bismarck needed to play realpolitik and use Austria again in the future. So again, Austria is going to be excluded, and that's going to be a really important thing too that's going to happen from this point on. Austria is going to come up many times. You're going to have the Angela, again, I can't pronounce German words, but it's the compromise, the agreement in 1867, where they put Austria-Hungary together for a while. It lasts until the end of World War I. But this was a very important war on the road to German unification. So I'm going to try to make slide number 28 a little bit simpler than maybe it is sometime. You can look it up if you want to read more about it. But anyway, basically, what's going to cause the Franco-Prussian War? Well, this is something that Bismarck wanted anyway. But because, again, France and unification and so on, it's going to be very important to allowing the German unification. So France, they're the only country really standing in the way of the full unification of Germany at this point. So here's what happened. Okay, you had one of the Spanish monarchs, it was one of the Isabellas, I want to say, but one of the Spanish monarchs had died, and there was no clear heir to the throne. So you're going to have, as we've seen before, we're going to have the situation where there's going to be not just one person, because they're all kind of related, not just one person would be in some sort of line of succession. There's going to be more than one. So Leopold, the Prince of the Hohenzollern family, was presented as a candidate to be the next monarch of Spain. The problem is the French really don't like that, because if you look at a map and you look at where France is, you look at where Spain is, and then you also look at where Prussia is, knowing that King William I is actually from the Hohenzollern family, then you're going to see that France would be surrounded with Hohenzollerns, right? On the left, to the west, you would have Spain, and then on the east, on the right, you would have Prussia. So this is not something that the French want to happen. So Napoleon III asked William, who apparently presented his his cousin, I guess, Leopold, to be a candidate for the next Spanish monarch. Napoleon III is just pretty angry, and he says, he says, apologize, and William I says, well, no, of course I'm not going to apologize. Now, the way all this happens is going to be actually explained in great detail on the next slide. You can take a time, and read that when you don't have anything to do. If you just want to read through it, it's not very long, but I don't want to have to read it to you, because I know you're perfectly capable of reading that yourself. But usually I'll just kind of zip through it a little bit in class, so I'll do that. Now, basically what's happening is this is a telegram that's going to Bismarck, okay? And this is going to explain sort of what just happened between Napoleon III and William I. So you go up there and you have it coming from, at the very beginning, the point of view of William, okay, the king. So His Majesty the King writes to me, whoever, of course, is sending this, and talks about being intercepted and so on, telling him that I shall obligate myself for all future time, never again to give my approval to the candidacy of the Hohenzollerns should it be renewed. Okay, so in other words, he's been asked to, hey, don't ever, ever support or appoint a member of your family. And it goes on, I refused to agree to this the last time, somewhat severely informing him basically that no one could see the future and do that. So he says, I don't even really know anything about it. My government's not involved. I'm paraphrasing it for you, right? So it says, since then, His Majesty, William the King, has received a dispatch from the prince, as His Majesty informed Count Benedetti, the French representative, that he was expecting news, blah, 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 blah. He decided that he wasn't going to see the French guy again. Nope, not going to see you, Benedetti. Nope, I'm done with you. But he didn't tell him that in person. He told him through a messenger. And he says, okay, I've got some confirmation from the prince, from Charles Anthony. And I know you've already told me that. You already knew it. So what have we got to talk about? Now, again, someone else, a third party's writing this, but His Majesty, William, leaves it to the judgment of Your Excellency, that is Bismarck, okay, whether or not to communicate this new demand and its rejection to our ambassadors and to the press. So this whole thing happens, and it's not really a life-threatening war-starting event until Bismarck decides, with that very last line of the telegram, that he does want to release this information to the press. And on the next slide, you will see what he actually released. So what Bismarck did was he basically took that long telegram and he edited it down, as you can see if you take a minute to read this particular one, which is slide number 30. You'll see that he edited it down to just the basics. Now, M's are bad M's, B-A-D and E-M-S. This is the place where King William was on vacation when all this was going on. So read what Bismarck said, and what it has. I am so sorry. That's my little old lady dog, Quincy, the 16-year-old I always talk about. Girl, I don't know what you want. Stop. Anyway, what Bismarck did was he edited this down to make it sound to the French as if the Prussian king had been disrespectful, and to make it sound to the Prussian people that the French had been disrespectful, therefore making the French and the Prussian people both ready and angry enough because of this encounter for war. So now we have the outbreak of the Franco-Prussian War. Really, the only thing I want you to know about it specifically, as far as a battle or anything like that, the Battle of Sedan is the battle where Napoleon III was captured. Okay, so you would think after your emperor is captured that the French would give up, but not so much. I mean, it's the French. They're going to do some interesting things. So what they do is they take this opportunity to try to set up, in the absence of an emperor, the rebels, I guess, who had never really wanted another monarch, but they took this opportunity to set up a third French Republic, okay, in September of 1870. So, the emperor's he's been captured. You've tried to set up this new republic. You keep fighting for a while, from September until January. So anyway, when he was captured, Napoleon the Third had given up, and he ended up being held in captivity for a while. He was, I think it was, I don't know, maybe 6 months or so. He was held in captivity in a certain place with a few of his men, and Napoleon the Third. I mean, he's gonna continue for the rest of his life. He's gonna be a spokesman. He's gonna be writing, in other words, where people are gonna read what he has written. And he was embarrassed to have been captured at Sedan. He was absolutely just devastated by that great loss. So what happens to him eventually is very different than what happened to his uncle Napoleon the First, who, remember, had we think his uncle, the first Napoleon, we think he had stomach cancer, because when he was in exile on the island, he kept writing a lot in his journals, and talked about his problems with his kidneys and so on. Now, Napoleon the Third is going to have a lot of different things wrong with him that the doctors had already diagnosed. Things like, he was very overweight. He ended up with gout, and he had arthritis and all kinds of stuff. So he did not ever present really a picture of great health when you talk about Napoleon the Third. But the poor guy, he's going to pass away when he was not, I mean, he was not that old, because by the time he was in his 30s and in his 40s, he had already gotten really sick many, many times. But he's going to continue trying to do several things all through till the end of his life, which is going to come in, let's see if I can remember. Let's see, he was in office 1852, 42. I think he's going to die not that long after the Battle of Sedan in 1871. I think he dies in 1873. So anyway, he's going to be the last of the French monarchs. Okay, so keep that in mind too, because an emperor is a monarch, like I said about his uncle. So he's going to be remembered as the last French monarch. And as I always say, today the French are on their fifth republic. So, since it was bothering me, I looked up when Napoleon III died, and he did die in 1873. But I did read something else that I had forgotten about. Again, I told you he had been troubled by the terrible loss at Sedan and his capture and all that. So, in the time from his capture and until his death, his health had just gotten worse and worse. But he had a couple of operations to try to remove gallstones. Now, remember, this is 1872, 1873. But he got really sick after all of that. And supposedly, this was what I thought was interesting. His last words were, "Isn't it true that we were cowards or we weren't cowards at Sedan?" Okay. So anyway, that I think is interesting. Isn't it true that we weren't cowards at Sedan? So he kept asking for this approval, or something like someone to tell him that it was okay what happened there, until literally his deathbed. So he did die, as I said, I looked it up, January 9th of 1873. Finally, as you know, once you have you have an armistice, ceasefire, and all that. Well, finally, they signed the Treaty of Frankfurt between the French and the Prussians, and that's going to be in May of 1871. France is going to be charged this incredible indemnity, or they're going to be charged this ridiculous amount for the war debts. Now, that's not a new thing. That was something the Greeks did, the Romans did. You know, the person who wins, the country, the state, the whatever, the winner makes the loser pay for the war debts. France, though, by Prussia, oh, France was treated really unreasonably. France was charged something like a $5 billion or franc debt. Okay, that's ridiculous. You know, that's bigger than any budget would have been, I would say, in any government in the Western world in 1871. It was crazy. Also, France lost the territories of Alsace and Lorraine, which we will hear about again when we get a little bit closer and talk about the world wars. So anyway, what was the final blow here for the French was January of 1871 at the Palace of Versailles, the most French thing you could imagine. William I, King of Prussia, is going to be crowned Kaiser. William I, the Emperor of Germany. So think of it this way. Think of it, say, as if Canada or somebody took over the United States, basically, won a war against the United States, and then came into Washington, D.C., to the White House to have themselves crowned as emperor. Oh, that's exactly what William was doing. The most French thing, as I said, you can think of is the Palace of Versailles. So German unity had been achieved with Prussia at the helm and Otto von Bismarck leading the whole thing the entire way through.